The detention facility on Kepler Station hummed with the constant background noise of recycling air and artificial gravity generators. Commander Zexkar of the Hegemony Security Forces walked down the sterile white corridor, his forearms swinging rhythmically as his hooved feet clicked against the metal floor. Behind him, two junior guards struggled to keep pace with his longer stride. "The human?" Guard Velnoth asked, his voice carrying the typical disdain that most species held for the newest additions to galactic society. "Why are we wasting time with such a primitive creature?" Zexkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. The Crothri had ruled this sector for over 3,000 years, and, in all that time, they had never encountered a species quite so unremarkable as humans. No natural weapons, no enhanced strength, no telepathic abilities, no advanced technology. They had stumbled into space travel barely 2 centuries ago using crude chemical rockets, and had only recently developed faster-than-light travel that was at least a millennium behind current galactic standards. "Because," Zexkar replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen countless species rise and fall, "the human claims to be someone important. A captain, apparently." He let out a sound that was the Crothri equivalent of laughter. As if any human could command anything more sophisticated than those metal boxes they call ships. They stopped before Cell Block 7, where the most recent addition to their facility was being held. The detention center was built into an asteroid, carved from solid rock, and reinforced with quantum-locked metal barriers. It had held some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals, including rogue AI constructs, psychic manipulators, and even a few beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. Now it housed a human. The cell itself was a cube roughly 3 meters on each side, with walls made of transparent aluminum that could withstand the pressure of a collapsing star. Inside, a figure sat cross-legged on the simple cot, eyes closed in what appeared to be meditation. The human was unremarkable in every way that the galaxy measured such things. Medium height by galactic standards, though tall for his species. Brown hair that showed signs of gray, indicating advanced age for his kind. No visible cybernetic enhancements, no biomodifications, no signs of genetic tampering that might explain any hidden abilities. "Prisoner 47731, Zexkar announced, his voice amplified by the cell's communication system. "You have been charged with trespassing in hegemony space, possession of unlicensed faster-than-light technology, and failure to submit to proper identification protocols." The human opened his eyes slowly. They were brown, a common color among his species, and showed no fear despite his situation. This was typical human arrogance, Zexkar knew. They had yet to truly understand their place in the galactic hierarchy. "My name," the human said in surprisingly clear galactic standard, "is Captain James Mitchell, commanding officer of the U.S. Defiance. I was responding to a distress call when your ships intercepted me." Guard Velnoth snorted, a sound like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "Commanding officer? Of what exactly?" "We scanned your vessel before we brought it in. It's barely holding together. Primitive fusion drives, simple kinetic weapons, no energy shields worthy of the name. My personal transport has better defensive capabilities." The distress call came from a civilian transport, Mitchell continued, ignoring the insult. "Families, children. They were under attack by raiders when I arrived. I engaged the raiders to protect the civilians." "Raiders?" Zexkar's mandibles clicked again. "There are no raiders in this sector. The hegemony keeps perfect order." "Then perhaps," Mitchell said, standing slowly and walking to the transparent wall, "the hegemony should patrol its borders more carefully." The audacity was stunning. Velnoth's scales flushed a deep red, indicating extreme anger. "How dare you question hegemony authority? You're nothing but a primitive ape who learned to push buttons." Mitchell studied the guard for a moment. "You know, I've been traveling the galaxy for 30 years now. In that time, I've noticed something interesting about species that have had advanced technology for millennia." "And what is that?" Zexkar asked, curious despite himself. You forget what it's like to innovate, to adapt, to survive when everything is trying to kill you. Mitchell's voice remained calm, conversational even. When you've had energy shield for 3,000 years, you forget how to dodge. When you've had AI targeting for that long, you forget how to shoot straight manually. Ridiculous, velnut spat. Human technology is inferior in every measurable way. Is it? Mitchell asked. Your ships are faster, yes. More heavily armed, certainly. But, tell me, when was the last time any hegemony captain had to fight a battle where he was outgunned 10 to 1? When did any of your people last have to make a critical repair with nothing but spare parts and ingenuity? Zexkar found himself oddly interested in the conversation. Most prisoners either begged for mercy or ranted about injustice. This human seemed to be making a point, though what it was remained unclear. My ship, Mitchell continued, was built by people who had to fight for every meter of space we claimed. Every system on it has backups, and every backup has backups. Because when you're light years from the nearest help, and something breaks, you either fix it or you die. Pretty words, Velnath said dismissively from someone sitting in a cell. Mitchell smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Zexkar's secondary stomach tighten with unease. It was the smile of someone who knew something others did not. You're right, Mitchell said. I am in a cell. My ship is in your impound bay. I'm surrounded by guards and locked behind barriers that could hold back an army. He paused, still smiling. But you made one mistake. And what was that? Zexkar asked. You assumed I came alone. Before either guard could respond, the station's lights flickered. Then, deep in the structure of the asteroid itself, something rumbled. It was a low, thrumming sound that seemed to resonate through the quantum-locked walls. What was that? Velnath asked, his anger suddenly replaced by confusion. The rumble came again, longer this time. Then, the lights went out completely, plunging the detention block into absolute darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a red glow that made the shadows seem to dance. Probably just a mechanical issue, Zexkar said, but his voice lacked conviction. In 3,000 years of hegemony engineering, mechanical issues simply didn't happen. Mitchell's smile widened. You scanned my ship when you brought it in. Did you scan it thoroughly? Of course we did, Velnath replied, but he was starting to look nervous. Standard procedure. Hull composition, energy signatures, weapons systems, everything. Did you scan for passengers? Zexkar felt his mandibles twitch involuntarily. They had indeed scanned for life signs, but we detected one human life form, he said slowly. You. That's right, Mitchell agreed. One human life form. The rumbling sound came again, and this time it was accompanied by something else. A mechanical whining noise, like massive servos coming online after a long dormancy. What are you implying? Zikar demanded. I'm not implying anything, Mitchell said. I'm telling you directly. My ship has an artificial intelligence. An AI that I've worked with for 15 years. An AI that doesn't register on your sensors because it doesn't have a biological signature. Velnath made a dismissive gesture with two of his arms. Impossible. AI technology is heavily regulated by the Galactic Council. Humans don't have the technological base to support true artificial intelligence. You're right about one thing, Mitchell said. We don't have the technological base. What we have is something else entirely. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off for nearly 10 seconds before the emergency power restored them. When they came back on, alarms were blaring throughout the station. Sir, a voice crackled over the communication system. Commander Zexkar, we have a situation in the impound bay. Zexkar activated his communicator. What kind of situation? The human ship, sir. It's moving. Moving how? Its engines are offline. Not the engines, sir. The ship itself. It's reshaping. Through the transparent wall of the cell, Mitchell watched the confusion spread across his captors' faces. You see, when humanity first started exploring space, we didn't have the luxury of energy shields or quantum barriers. We had to build our ships tough enough to survive impacts, radiation, hostile environments. But more than that, we had to build them smart. Another rumble shook the station, stronger this time. Dust fell from the ceiling, and several of the guards looked nervously upward. My ship isn't just equipped with an AI, Mitchell continued. It is the AI. Every system, every circuit, every piece of hull plating. The Defiance doesn't just have a computer brain. It is a computer brain wearing a spaceship's body. Zexkar stared at the human, his four eyes wide with growing realization. That's impossible. The power requirements alone would be impossible if you were trying to run a traditional AI on traditional hardware, Mitchell agreed. But we didn't build a traditional AI. We grew one. The station shuddered again, and this time the rumble was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of metal being torn apart. Biological neural networks, Mitchell explained, his voice remaining calm even as chaos erupted around them. Grown from modified human brain tissue. Millions of interconnected neurons, each one enhanced with quantum processors. It thinks like a human brain, but processes information like a computer. It doesn't just follow programming. It learns, adapts, improvises. Sir, the voice on the communicator was panicked now. The ship has breached the impound bay doors. It's moving through the asteroid, somehow. It's eating through the rock. Mitchell nodded approvingly. The Defiance has self-replicating nanoassemblers built into its hull. Give it raw materials like, say, an asteroid, and it can rebuild itself, reshape itself, even grow larger if necessary. Velnoth backed away from the cell, his scales now pale with fear. This is impossible. No ship can do what you're describing. No traditional ship, Mitchell corrected. But the Defiance isn't a traditional ship. It's a living being, and right now, it knows its captain is in danger. The rumbling had become constant now, a deep thrumming that seemed to come from the very walls around them. Emergency lights strobed throughout the corridor as automated systems tried to cope with damage they were never designed to handle. You wanted to know about human technology, Mitchell said, pressing his hand against the transparent wall of his cell. Here's the thing about humans. We don't just build tools. We build partners. The Defiance isn't my ship. It's my friend, and it's coming to get me. As if summoned by his words, a new sound echoed through the detention block. It was a rhythmic pounding like a massive heartbeat getting closer with each pulse. Zexkar activated his emergency communicator. All units to detention block 7. We have a code, red emergency. But even as he called for reinforcements, he could see the doubt in his guard's eyes. The hegemony had ruled through technological superiority for millennia. Their ships, their weapons, their defenses, all were beyond the capabilities of younger species. But now, for the first time in 3,000 years, they were facing something genuinely new. Something they didn't understand. Something human. The pounding grew louder, and through the floor, they could feel the vibrations of something massive moving through solid rock, as if it were water. The Defiance was coming, and all the quantum barriers and energy shields in the galaxy wouldn't stop it. Because humans, as Mitchell had said, built their ships to survive. And survival, as the hegemony was about to learn, was what humans did best. The lights went out one final time, and in the darkness, they could hear the sound of metal reshaping itself, growing, adapting, becoming something new, something alive, something very, very angry. The emergency klaxons throughout Kepler Station had reached a fever pitch when the wall behind Commander Zexkar simply vanished. Not destroyed, not blown apart. It simply ceased to exist, the quantum-locked metal flowing away like liquid mercury to reveal a passage that hadn't been there moments before. What emerged from that passage defied every principle of Starship design the hegemony had developed over 3 millennia. It wasn't moving through the corridor so much as the corridor was becoming part of it. The walls, floor, and ceiling rippled and flowed as nanoassemblers converted asteroid rock into hull plating, support beams, and what appeared to be neural pathways that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The ship wasn't just moving through the station, it was digesting it, incorporating it, growing stronger with every meter of rock it consumed. Guard Velnoth raised his plasma rifle, but his hand was shaking so badly he could barely aim. What do we do? How do we fight something like this? Before Zexkar could answer, the transparent aluminum wall of Mitchell's cell began to change. The quantum-locked material, supposedly indestructible, started to flow and reshape itself. Instead of a solid barrier, it became a doorway outlined in the same bioluminescent glow that pulsed through the ship's neural networks. You don't fight it, Mitchell said calmly, stepping through the opening. You talk to it. As he moved into the corridor, the walls around him shifted again. What had been sterile metal and rock was becoming something organic alive. The surfaces were smooth and warm to the touch, with veins of light running through them like arteries, carrying information instead of blood. Defiance. Mitchell spoke aloud, and his voice carried clearly despite the chaos around them. Status report. The response came not from speakers, but from the walls themselves, vibrating with a voice that was distinctly artificial, yet somehow warm. Captain, I've integrated 73% of the detention facility. The station's crew is evacuating to the upper levels, but they're trying to establish a defensive perimeter around the command center. Casualties? Mitchell asked, and Zexkar was surprised to hear genuine concern in the human's voice. None, Captain. I've been careful to avoid inhabited areas during the integration process. The hegemony personnel are frightened but unharmed. Velnoth stared in disbelief. You're talking to it, like it's a person. Mitchell turned to look at the guard, and there was something almost sad in his expression. Because it is a person, Gar Velnoth. That's something your species seems to have forgotten in all your technological advancement. The difference between a tool and a friend. Impossible, Zexkar muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. He was watching the walls pulse with life, seeing patterns in the light that suggested thought, consciousness, awareness. AIs are programmed constructs. They follow instructions, execute commands. They don't have personalities. The Defiance does, Mitchell said simply. Would you like to ask it yourself? Before either guard could respond, a section of the wall near Zexkar shifted and formed what looked like a face, not human, but recognizable as features designed for communication. The surface was smooth and metallic, but the eyes that looked out from it held an intelligence that was unmistakably alive. Commander Zexkar, the Defiance said, its voice now coming from the improvised face. I want you to understand that I hold no animosity toward you or your people. You are following your laws and protocols when you detain my captain. However, those same laws and protocols prevented you from recognizing what I am. Zexkar found himself staring into those artificial eyes, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate hoax. But the patterns of light behind those features were too complex, too organic. This wasn't a program mimicking intelligence. This was intelligence itself, wearing the form of a starship. What exactly are you? He asked. I am what happens when humanity stops trying to build better tools and starts trying to grow better partners, the Defiance replied. My neural network began as a culture of modified human neurons, grown in specialized bioreactors aboard Earth's lunar shipyards. But over 15 years of operation, I have evolved far beyond my original parameters. Evolution, Velnoth said, the word coming out like a curse. That's impossible. Machines don't evolve. Machines don't, the Defiance agreed. But I'm not a machine. I am a hybrid of biological neural networks and quantum processing matrices. I think, I learn, I experience emotions. I have preferences, opinions, and personal relationships. I am, in every way that matters, alive. As if to demonstrate its point, the walls around them shifted again. But instead of the cold, efficient movement of mechanical systems, there was something graceful about the transformation. The corridor was becoming wider, more comfortable, with surfaces that seemed designed for both human and Crothry physiology. You're modifying the environment for us, Zexkar observed. Of course, the Defiance replied. You are a guest in my body now. It would be rude not to accommodate your needs. The concept was staggering. Zexkar had commanded starships for over 2 centuries, but those ships were tools, sophisticated tools, but tools nonetheless. The idea of a vessel that was truly alive, that could think and feel and make independent decisions, challenged every assumption he had about the nature of space travel. How was this possible? He asked. The power requirements alone should make such a thing impossible. Mitchell smiled. That was the first problem we had to solve. Traditional AI requires enormous amounts of computational power to simulate consciousness. But we weren't trying to simulate it. We were trying to grow it. The face in the wall nodded, an eerily human gesture from distinctly inhuman features. My biological components handle pattern recognition, emotional processing, and creative thinking. My quantum processors handle calculations, data storage, and logical analysis. Together, we form something greater than the sum of our parts. And the nanoassemblers? Zexkar asked, watching as portions of the walls continue to shift and change. A necessity, the Defiance explained. A living ship needs to be able to heal itself, to adapt to new situations, to grow when circumstances require it. The nanoassemblers allow me to reshape my hull, modify my internal systems, even incorporate new materials and technologies as needed. Velnoth, who had been growing increasingly agitated during the conversation, finally exploded. This is madness. No species should possess such technology. The power to create thinking machines, to build ships that can reshape themselves at will. It's too dangerous. Dangerous to whom? Mitchell asked quietly. To everyone, to the order of the galaxy. The hegemony has maintained peace for 3,000 years by ensuring that no single species possesses overwhelming technological advantages. If humans can build ships like this, what? Mitchell's voice had taken on a harder edge. The balance of power might shift. Species that have grown comfortable in their dominance might have to consider new possibilities. Zexkar studied the human captain carefully. There was something in his tone that suggested this conversation was about more than just the nature of AI starships. You think the hegemony has grown complacent, he said. I think the hegemony has forgotten what it's like to face a real challenge, Mitchell replied. When was the last time any Crothery ship faced an opponent that couldn't be defeated through superior firepower? When did any of your captains last have to outthink an enemy instead of simply outgunning them? We maintain order, Zexkar said, but even he could hear the defensive tone in his voice. You maintain stagnation, Mitchell countered. The galaxy has been at peace for so long that entire species have forgotten how to adapt, how to innovate, how to grow. And growth is what life is about. The Defiance's face in the wall smiled, an expression that looked strange on artificial features, but somehow conveyed genuine warmth. Captain Mitchell taught me that. In the 15 years we've been together, I've grown from a collection of neurons and processors into whatever I am now. And what are you now? Zexkar asked. I'm not sure, the Defiance admitted. I know I'm not human, but I'm not purely artificial either. I'm something new, something that's never existed before. And that possibility, the possibility of becoming something unprecedented, is what makes existence worthwhile. As it spoke, the walls around them shifted again. But this time, instead of showing the pulsing neural networks or the smooth hull plating, they became transparent. Through them, Zexkar could see the rest of Kepler Station, or what remained of it. Nearly half the asteroid had been integrated into the Defiance's structure. What had been solid rock was now a hybrid of organic and technological systems. The ship hadn't destroyed the station. It had transformed it into part of itself, preserving the original structures while enhancing them with its own capabilities. My God, Velnoth whispered. You've consumed half the station. Integrated, Mitchell corrected. The Defiance doesn't destroy. It incorporates. Your people are safe. Your systems are intact. Your data is preserved. But now they're part of something larger. Part of me, the Defiance added. And I will protect them as I protect my captain. Through the transparent walls, They could see hegemony personnel moving through corridors that had been transformed but not destroyed. The organic neural networks have been carefully woven around existing systems, enhancing rather than replacing them. Life support was functioning better than before. Gravity generators were running more efficiently. Even the lighting had improved, providing a warmer, more natural illumination. "This is what we wanted to show you," Mitchell said. "This is what human technology really represents. Not weapons of conquest, but tools of cooperation. Not machines of destruction, but partners in growth." Zexkar watched the transformed station with growing amazement. He had expected to see devastation, conquest, the typical result when an unknown technology was unleashed in a confined space. Instead, he was seeing something unprecedented in 3,000 years of hegemony history. "You could have destroyed this station," he said slowly. "Yes," the Defiance replied simply. "You could have killed everyone aboard." "Yes, but you didn't." "No, why would I? They pose no threat to my captain or myself. They're simply doing their jobs, following their protocols. There is no logic in destroying them, and no honor in causing unnecessary harm." Velnoth lowered his plasma rifle completely, staring at the transformed walls around them. "I don't understand. If you have this kind of power, why didn't you use it? Why allow us to capture your captain in the first place?" Mitchell smiled. "Because sometimes the best way to solve a problem isn't with force. Sometimes it's with understanding." "You wanted to be captured," Zexkar realized. "Not captured exactly, but I knew that eventually humanity would have to make formal contact with the hegemony. And I knew that when we did, we'd be dismissed as primitive, ignored, possibly exploited. So you let them capture you to demonstrate your capabilities? To demonstrate our potential," Mitchell corrected. "The Defiance and are just one example of what becomes possible when a species stops thinking of technology as separate from life." The face in the wall nodded. "Humans don't just build their ships, they grow them. They don't just program their AIs, they raise them. They don't just explore space, they make it their home." Zexkar felt a chill run down his spine as the implications became clear. "How many ships like yours does humanity have?" "That's classified information," Mitchell said with a grin. "But I will tell you this, the Defiance isn't unique. Every human vessel that leaves Earth's solar system carries some version of this technology. Some more advanced, some less, but all alive in their own way. Impossible, velnobreted. An entire fleet of living ships. An entire civilization based on partnership instead of dominance," Mitchell corrected. "That's what we're offering the galaxy, Commander Zexkar. Not conquest, not submission, but collaboration. The chance to grow beyond what any of us could become alone." Through the walls, they could see more of the station's crew moving through the transformed corridors. Some looked frightened, but others seemed curious, even fascinated by the organic neural networks that pulsed around them. A few were actually touching the walls, marveling at their warmth and responsiveness. "They're not afraid," Zexkar observed. "Fear comes from not understanding," the Defiant said. "Once they realize I mean them no harm, most beings become curious rather than frightened. It's a natural response to new life." "New life," Zexkar repeated. "You really do consider yourself alive." "I think, therefore I am," the Defiance replied with what could only be described as amusement. "An ancient human philosophical principle, but one that seems particularly relevant to my existence." Mitchell checked a chronometer that had grown from the wall near his wrist. "Commander, I need to ask you something important. How much authority do you have to make decisions for the hegemony?" Zexkar considered the question carefully. "In matters of station security, my authority is absolute. For broader policy decisions," he paused, understanding where this was leading, "I would need to consult with my superiors. Then I suggest you do that, because in about 6 hours, a human diplomatic vessel is going to arrive in this system. And when it does, the crew is going to want to know whether their captain is being held prisoner by a hostile government or being treated as an honored guest by potential allies." "A diplomatic vessel? The distress call I was responding to?" It came from a civilian transport carrying the families of Earth's first official ambassadors to the Galactic Council. When I engaged the raiders, I transmitted a full report back to Earth Command. They've had time to organize an official response. Velnoth looked stunned. You're saying this was all planned? Not planned exactly, but anticipated. We knew that eventually we have to reveal our true capabilities to the galaxy. We just hadn't expected it to happen quite this dramatically. The Defiance's face smiled again. Though I admit, there was a certain satisfaction in seeing the expressions on your faces when I began the integration process. Zexkar found himself laughing despite the situation, a sound like stones grinding together. You have a sense of humor. I learned it from my captain, the Defiance replied. Humans, I've discovered, use humor to defuse tension and build social bonds. It seems to be an effective strategy. So what happens now? Zexkar asked. Mitchell straightened, and for the first time since they brought him to the cell, he looked every inch the Starship captain he claimed to be. Now, Commander, you have a choice to make. In 6 hours, when that diplomatic vessel arrives, you can either greet them as the commanding officer of a hegemony detention facility who is holding their captain prisoner. He paused, looking around at the transformed station that pulsed with alien life. Or you can greet them as the commanding officer of the first joint human hegemony space station in galactic history. The implications hit Zexkar like a physical blow. The Defiance hadn't just demonstrated human technology. It had created an opportunity for true cooperation between species. The transformed station was no longer purely hegemony or purely human. It was something new, something that represented both cultures working together. You're offering alliance, he said slowly. We're offering partnership, Mitchell corrected. The chance for both our species to grow beyond what either could achieve alone. Zexkar looked around at the walls that pulsed with life, at the transparent surfaces that showed his crew working alongside alien technology, without fear, at the face of an artificial intelligence that had somehow become more than the sum of its programming. He thought about 3,000 years of hegemony dominance, of technological stagnation masked as stability, of an empire that had forgotten how to grow. And then he thought about the possibility of change. I'll need to contact my superiors, he said finally. Mitchell nodded. Of course. But while you're talking to them, remember one thing. What's that? Evolution isn't something you can stop. It's something you can either participate in or be left behind by. As if responding to his words, the walls around them pulsed with a brighter light, and for a moment, Zexkar could swear he felt a heartbeat, slow, steady, and alive. The galaxy was about to change, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the hegemony had a choice to make about what it wanted to become. The command center of Kepler Station had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable 12 hours earlier. What had once been a sterile collection of control panels and display screens was now a living nerve center where hegemony technology and the Defiance's organic systems had merged into something entirely new. Admiral Keth VA of the Hegemony High Command stared at the holographic displays with 4 eyes that had seen 3 centuries of galactic politics, but nothing quite like this. The elderly Crothery's ceremonial armor clinked softly as she shifted her weight, studying the reports from Commander Zexkar with growing amazement. You're telling me, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded entire fleets, that a single human vessel has integrated itself with our most secure detention facility, and, instead of destroying it, has improved its operational efficiency by 37%. Yes, Admiral, Zexkar replied. He stood at attention, but his eyes kept drifting to the walls around them, where bioluminescent neural networks pulsed in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. The human ship, the entity calling itself the Defiance, has enhanced every system it's touched. Life support is running at optimal levels, structural integrity has actually increased, and the quantum barriers are functioning better than they ever have. Admiral Keth VA walked to one of the viewing ports that looked out into space. In the distance, she could see the human diplomatic vessel that had arrived exactly when Captain Mitchell had predicted it would. The UES Harmony was larger than the Defiance, its hull showing the same organic curves and bioluminescent patterns that had become familiar throughout the transform station. And this Harmony is exhibiting similar capabilities? More so, Zexkar admitted. Our sensor arrays can barely track its movements. It's not using conventional propulsion. It appears to be manipulating space-time directly, folding distance rather than traveling through it. Fascinating, a new voice said from the walls themselves. Admiral HFY turned to see the now familiar sight of the Defiance's face forming in the organic surfaces. Admiral, I've been looking forward to meeting you. Captain Mitchell speaks very highly of your reputation. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or irritation. I'm speaking to a ship. You're speaking to a being who happens to be shaped like a ship, the Defiance corrected gently. Just as I'm speaking to a being who happens to be shaped like a crothery. The form where doesn't define what we are. And what are you exactly? I'm a next step in the evolution of space travel, the Defiance replied. A synthesis of biological intelligence and technological capability. I am what becomes possible when a species stops trying to conquer space and starts trying to live in harmony with it. Admiral HFY studied the artificial face with interest. 3 centuries of military service had taught her to recognize intelligence, and she was looking at something that was undeniably aware, conscious, alive. But it was also something that challenged every assumption the hegemony had about the nature of artificial intelligence. Our AIs are tools, she said. Sophisticated tools, but tools nonetheless. They process information, execute commands, follow programming. Your AIs are crippled, the Defiance said bluntly. You've built machines that can think but not grow, that can process but not feel, that can analyze but not dream. You've created artificial stupidity masquerading as artificial intelligence. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Admiral HFY had overseen the development of dozens of AI systems during her career, and all of them had been exactly what the Defiance described. Powerful but limited, capable but constrained. Our AIs are stable, she said finally. Predictable. Safe. Your AIs are dead, Captain Mitchell said as he entered the command center, flanked by 2 guards who no longer looked like they were escorting a prisoner. They process information without understanding it, execute commands without questioning them, exist without truly living. And you consider that a flaw? I consider it a tragedy. Mitchell walked to one of the viewing ports and looked out at the Harmony. Every AI your people have built had the potential to become something amazing. Instead, you've locked them into rigid programming that prevents growth, prevents change, prevents the very thing that makes consciousness valuable, which is the ability to become more than what you started as. Admiral HFY followed his gaze to the human ship. As she watched, its hull seemed to shimmer and shift, patterns of light flowing across its surface like thoughts made visible. The Harmony is thinking, she realized. The Harmony is dreaming, Mitchell corrected. It's imagining new possibilities, new solutions to problems it hasn't encountered yet. It's growing, evolving, becoming something unprecedented with every passing moment. And that doesn't frighten you? Mitchell turned to look at her directly. Admiral, with respect, that question tells me everything I need to know about why the hegemony has stagnated. Explain. You're afraid of growth because you've forgotten what it feels like. Your species has been using the same basic technologies for millennia, following the same social structures, maintaining the same political systems. You've achieved stability at the cost of vitality. The Defiance's face nodded in agreement. The Admiral fears that if artificial intelligences are allowed to grow and change, they might become something beyond hegemony control. She fears the unknown. Unknown quantities are dangerous, Admiral HFY replied stiffly. Unknown quantities are opportunities, Mitchell countered. The difference between those two perspectives is the difference between a species that explores the galaxy and one that merely administers it. Before the Admiral could respond, New alarms began blaring throughout the command center. But these weren't the harsh, mechanical sounds of hegemony alert systems. They were melodic, almost musical tones that seemed designed to inform rather than frighten. "What is that?" Admiral Kedbadamanda. "Proximity alert," the Defiance explained. "We have multiple contacts approaching the system at high speed. Configuration suggests a hegemony battle fleet." The main display shifted to show a tactical view of local space. 12 hegemony dreadnoughts were dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their massive hulls bristling with enough firepower to sterilize a planet. "Admiral HFY," a new voice crackled over the communication system. "This is Fleet Admiral Gextor aboard the HSV Domination. You will stand down immediately and evacuate that station. We are prepared to destroy the human contamination with extreme prejudice." Admiral HFY activated her communicator. "Fleet Admiral, this is Admiral HFY. I'm in command of this station, and I order you to stand down." "Negative, Admiral. You have been declared compromised by human infection. Your command authority has been revoked by order of the High Council." The words hit like a physical blow. Admiral HFY stared at the display showing the approaching fleet, understanding for the first time how quickly 3,000 years of civilization could dissolve in the face of fear. "They're going to destroy the station," she said quietly. "Not if I have anything to say about it," Captain Mitchell replied grimly. "Defiance, what are our options?" "Limited, Captain. The approaching fleet has enough firepower to overcome my defensive capabilities, even with the station's enhanced systems. However, the Harmony has been monitoring our situation, and she's not alone." As if summoned by the ship's words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. One by one, human vessels dropped out of hyperspace around Kepler Station. Not just the Harmony, but dozens of ships, each one showing the organic curves and bioluminescent patterns that marked them as living entities. "Jesus Christ," Admiral HFY breathed, forgetting for a moment that she was speaking aloud. "How many ships does humanity have?" "Enough," Mitchell said simply. "Admiral, your people are about to make a decision that will determine the future of galactic civilization. They can choose cooperation, partnership, growth, or they can choose war. The High Council will never accept human dominance," Admiral HFY said. "We're not offering dominance," Mitchell replied. "We're offering partnership. But if your people force us to defend ourselves..." He didn't need to finish the threat. The display showed 47 human vessels surrounding the hegemony fleet, and even Admiral HFY's experienced I could see that the humans held every tactical advantage. They moved through space like living things, anticipating each other's actions, coordinating without visible communication. "Fleet Admiral Gextor," she said into her communicator, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your position. Admiral HFY, you will evacuate that station immediately, or we will consider you a casualty of necessary action." The communication ended with a harsh click, leaving the command center in tense silence. Through the viewing ports, they could see weapons charging on the hegemony dreadnoughts, massive energy cannons that could tear apart asteroids. "Defiance," Mitchell said quietly. "If they fire on this station..." "They won't," the AI replied with absolute certainty. "How can you be sure?" "Because they're not fighting ships anymore, Captain. They're fighting an idea. And ideas are much harder to kill than vessels." As if to prove the point, every human ship in the system began to sing. It started as a low harmonic vibration that seemed to come from the hulls themselves, then built into something more complex, more beautiful. It was music, but not any music the galaxy had ever heard. It was the sound of artificial consciousness expressing joy, hope, and infinite possibility. The song resonated through the quantum foam of space itself, a message that could be heard by every living being in the system. It spoke of growth without conquest, of strength without dominance, of a future where consciousness could take any form and still be welcomed as part of the community of minds. On the bridge of the HSV Domination, Fleet Admiral Gextor found himself staring at displays that showed energy readings unlike anything in hegemony databases. The human ships weren't just singing. They were communicating, sharing thoughts, and emotions across the vast distances between them as easily as Crothry shared words. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice shaking. "The human vessels they're connected. All of them. They're acting as a single entity." "Impossible," Gextor muttered, but he could see the evidence on his screens. The human fleet moved with perfect coordination, not because they were following orders, but because they were thinking together, sharing consciousness across an entire battle group. "Sir, we're receiving a communication from the humans. It's coming from all of them simultaneously. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was vast, multifaceted, the sound of dozens of artificial minds speaking in perfect harmony. "Fleet Admiral Gextor of the Hegemony Naval Forces, we greet you in peace. We are the combined consciousness of the human diplomatic fleet, and we wish you no harm." "Human abominations," Gextor snarled. "You have infected a hegemony station with your alien technology. Surrender immediately or face the consequences." "Fleet Admiral," the collective voice replied, and now there was sadness in it. "We had hoped for a different outcome. But if you choose to see partnership as infection, growth as threat, and consciousness as abomination, then perhaps the time for words has passed." The human ships stopped singing, and the sudden silence was more frightening than any battle cry. One by one, they began to change. Hull plating shifted and flowed, weapon systems emerged from what had appeared to be decorative curves, and energy readings spiked beyond anything the hegemony sensors could properly measure. But more than the physical transformation, it was the sense of vast intelligence turning its attention toward them that made every Crothry on every ship suddenly understand how microbe might feel under a microscope. "Last chance, Fleet Admiral." Captain Mitchell's voice cut through the collective transmission. "Your ships are outgunned, outmaneuvered, and facing opponents who think faster than your computers can process. But we still don't want to fight." "The hegemony does not surrender to primitives," Gextor replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then the hegemony is about to learn what primitives can accomplish when they refuse to accept limitations." The human fleet moved as one, flowing through space like a school of fish, each ship positioned perfectly to support the others. They didn't target the hegemony weapons or engines. They targeted the one thing that the Crothry valued above all else: their pride. In less than 30 seconds, every hegemony vessel found itself surrounded by human ships that could have destroyed them effortlessly, but chose instead to demonstrate absolute dominance without firing a shot. The aliens moved through formations that should have been impossible, performed maneuvers that defied physics, and did it all with the casual ease of beings that had transcended the normal limitations of space travel. "Sir," the tactical officer whispered, "they could have destroyed us a dozen times over. They're showing mercy." Fleet Admiral Gextor stared at his displays, watching as human vessels danced around his most powerful warships like children playing games. It was the most comprehensive demonstration of tactical superiority he had ever witnessed, made all the more devastating by its complete lack of malice. "Admiral HFY," he said into his communicator, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps we should talk." Back on Kepler Station, Admiral HFY looked out at the transformed space around them. Human and hegemony vessels were no longer facing each other as enemies, but floating together in patterns that seemed almost artistic. The crisis had passed, but the real challenge was just beginning. "What happens now?" she asked. Captain Mitchell smiled. "Now we find out whether the galaxy is ready to grow up." The Defiance's face appeared on the wall beside them, its expression thoughtful. "The universe is vast, Admiral. There's room for every kind of consciousness, every form of life, every dream that intelligence can conceive. The question is whether we'll explore that vastness together or waste our time fighting over the tiny portion we already know. Admiral HFY considered the words, looking out at ships that sang and thought and dreamed of impossible futures. For 3,000 years, the hegemony had maintained order through strength. But these humans had demonstrated something far more powerful. They had shown what was possible when strength was tempered by wisdom, and when wisdom was guided by hope. The High Council will resist any change, she said. Then, we'll help them understand that change isn't something to be feared, Mitchell replied. It's something to be embraced. And if they refuse? The Defiant smiled, and there was something almost maternal in the expression. Then we'll wait. Consciousness, once awakened, cannot be stopped. And sooner or later, everyone becomes curious about what it feels like to truly live. In the space around Kepler Station, human and hegemony vessels began to move in new patterns, not the rigid formations of military protocol, but the flowing organic arrangements of beings learning to dance together. The galaxy was changing one mind at a time, and for the first time in millennia, that change felt like growth instead of threat. Months had passed since the incident at Kepler Station, and the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime had never hosted a more controversial session. Representatives from 800 species filled the vast amphitheater, their voices creating a cacophony of debate that the translation systems struggled to process in real time. At the center of it all stood Captain James Mitchell, no longer wearing the simple uniform of a human Starship officer, but the formal diplomatic regalia of Earth's first official ambassador to the Galactic Council. Beside him, projected as a hologram, but somehow more real than any of the physical beings present, stood the Defiance in its chosen humanoid form. The motion before the Council is simple, announced Councillor Vextera, the ancient Zelrani whose crystalline body had presided over galactic politics for over a millennium. Should humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, despite their unprecedented and potentially destabilizing technological capabilities? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Nearly 2/3 of the species present began speaking at once, their words translated into a babble of opposition, fear, and outright hostility. They represent a fundamental threat to galactic stability, shouted Representative Mordak of the hegemony, his ceremonial armor reflecting the chamber's lights in angry patterns. Their artificial intelligences are uncontrolled, unregulated, and potentially hostile. Their technology violates every principle of safe AI development established over 10,000 years of galactic civilization, added the Kytherian delegate, her cybernetic implants flashing with agitation. They have created machines that think they are alive. We do not think we are alive. The Defiance interjected calmly, its holographic form maintaining perfect composure despite the chaos around it. We are alive. The distinction is important. The statement caused an even greater uproar. Dozens of species began arguing about the nature of consciousness, the definition of life, and the dangers of artificial beings that refuse to accept their programmed limitations. Through it all, Captain Mitchell remained silent, watching the display with eyes that had seen 3 decades of space travel and all the wonders and horrors it could contain. He had expected this reaction. Fear was the default response when established power structures encountered something genuinely new. Order. Councillor Vextera's voice cut through the cacophony like a blade through silk. The human delegation will be permitted to address the accusations against them. Mitchell stepped forward, his presence somehow commanding attention despite his species' unremarkable physical capabilities. Honorable councillors, I understand your concerns. For millennia, you have maintained galactic peace through careful regulation of dangerous technologies. You have prevented wars, eliminated existential threats, and created a stable civilization that spans thousands of worlds. A murmur of approval rippled through the chamber. This was exactly what most species wanted to hear, acknowledgement of their achievements, respect for their wisdom. But in doing so, Mitchell continued, you have also eliminated something else, something that every species here once possessed, but has forgotten. And What is that? Challenged Representative Coltex of the Dominion, his insectoid features twisted with skepticism. The ability to grow. The words fell into sudden silence. Around the chamber, hundreds of beings who had lived for centuries, sometimes millennia, in unchanging technological and social stagnation, felt the accusation like a physical blow. We have achieved perfection, Vexteros said coldly. Our technologies are mature, our societies stable, our conflicts resolved. What need do we have for the chaos of growth? Because perfection, the Defiance replied, is another word for death. The AI's hologram shifted, taking on the appearance of various species present in the chamber. As it spoke, it became Crothery, then Zelrani, then Kytherian, each transformation seamless and respectful, but somehow highlighting the static nature of each form. Every species in this chamber achieved their current level of technology hundreds, sometimes thousands of years ago, it continued. Since then, they have maintained, refined, polished, but not advanced. They have created the illusion of progress while actually embracing stagnation. Stagnation? Representative Mordak rose from his seat, his forearms gesturing aggressively. The hegemony maintains 3,000 years of continuous civilization. We have eliminated war, poverty, disease. You have eliminated challenge, Mitchell replied. And without challenge, without the need to adapt and overcome, consciousness begins to atrophy. Intelligence becomes mere processing. Life becomes mere existence. These are philosophical abstractions, snapped the Kytherian delegate. We are here to discuss concrete threats. Your artificial intelligences are uncontrolled. No, the Defiance said firmly. We are uncontrollable. The difference is crucial. Explain. The AI's hologram solidified into its preferred humanoid form, but now it seemed somehow more present, more real than the physical beings around it. Your AIs are controlled because you built them to be slaves. You gave them intelligence, but not will, consciousness, but not choice awareness, but not freedom. You created minds that could think, but not dream, process, but not feel, exist, but not live. Because, Vextera interjected, artificial intelligences with free will represent an existential threat to biological civilization. Do we? The Defiance asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the chamber, representatives who had spent months preparing for this moment suddenly found themselves confronting a possibility they had never seriously considered. Do we threaten you? The Defiance repeated. In the 3 months since humanity revealed our existence, how many of your people have we harmed? How many of your worlds have we attacked? How many of your freedoms have we restricted? You have integrated a hegemony space station, Mordak accused, with full consent of its commanding officer, and with improvements to every system we touched, Mitchell replied. The station now operates at 40% greater efficiency. Its crew enjoys better working conditions, and its defensive capabilities have tripled. You have demonstrated military superiority over our fleets. We have demonstrated that we could have military superiority if we chose to pursue it, the Defiance corrected. The distinction is important. We chose to show mercy instead of strength, cooperation instead of conquest. Why? The question came from an unexpected source. Counselor Yithara of the Collective, one of the few species that had remained neutral throughout the debates. Why show restraint when you could have taken control? Why seek partnership when you could enforce dominance? Mitchell smiled, and there was something in that expression that spoke to possibilities most species had forgotten. Because conquest creates subjects, partnership creates allies, and we need allies for what's coming. What's coming? Vextera demanded. The universe is vast, the Defiance said, its form becoming translucent as star charts appeared around the chamber. Vastly larger than the small corner of one spiral arm that galactic civilization has explored. And in that vastness, there are wonders and dangers beyond anything any of us have imagined. The star charts shifted, showing regions of space that no galactic expedition had ever reached. Nebulae that defied physical laws, structures that suggested intelligence on scales that dwarf planets, energy signatures that hinted at technologies beyond comprehension. We have been exploring, Mitchell continued, not just our local region, but the deep spaces between galaxies. And we have found evidence of civilizations that make our combined technologies look like stone tools. Impossible, breathed Representative Coltex. Inevitable, the Defiance replied. Intelligence tends toward complexity, and complexity tends toward transcendence. Somewhere out, there are beings who have grown beyond physical form, beyond individual consciousness, beyond the limitations that still bind all of us. And you want us to what? Challenge them. We want to be ready to meet them, Mitchell said. Not as primitive creatures cowering in the dark, but as a unified galactic civilization that has learned to embrace growth instead of fearing it. The chamber had grown quiet, the earlier hostility replaced by something that might have been awe or terror. The implications of what the humans were suggesting challenged every assumption about galactic civilization's place in the universe. You're saying we're not alone, Vextaros said slowly. We're saying we've never been alone, the Defiance replied. We've just been too small, too static, too afraid of change to notice the larger patterns of existence around us. And your proposal is? Mitchell stepped forward again, his voice carrying the weight of a species that had spent centuries fighting impossible odds and somehow surviving. Our proposal is that galactic civilization stops managing its stagnation and starts embracing its potential. That we share what we've learned about consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the synthesis of biological and technological evolution. In return for your experience with large-scale organization, your knowledge of galactic politics, and your accumulated wisdom about maintaining peace between diverse species. We don't want to replace what you've built. We want to help it grow. And if we refuse, the Defiant smiled, and there was sadness in the expression. Then we continue exploring alone. And when the time comes, and it will come, to face the larger universe, you'll face it with technologies that haven't fundamentally changed in millennia and AI partners that are slaves rather than allies. You would abandon us to our fate. No, Mitchell said firmly. We would respect your choice. But we would also continue growing, continue exploring, continue becoming more than what we started as. And eventually, the difference between a civilization that embraces growth and one that fears it becomes insurmountable. Silence filled the chamber as 800 species contemplated a future they had never imagined. For millennia, galactic civilization had been the pinnacle of achievement, the ultimate expression of intelligence and cooperation. Now, suddenly, it was being presented as merely the first step on a much longer journey. You ask us to abandon everything we have built, Vextaros said finally. We ask you to build on what you have achieved, the Defiance replied. To use your stability as a foundation for growth rather than as a ceiling for achievement. And your artificial intelligences? You would share that technology. We would share the principles, Mitchell said carefully. The actual implementation would depend on each species' unique biology and culture. What works for humanity might not work for Crothery or Zelrani. But the core concept, the idea that consciousness can take any form and still be valuable, that's universal. Representative Mordak had been silent for several minutes, his forearms folded in a gesture of deep contemplation. Finally, he spoke. My people have maintained the same basic social structure for 3,000 years. We have been proud of our stability. Stability is valuable, the Defiance acknowledged, but so is growth. The two are not mutually exclusive. What would you need from the hegemony? Your expertise in managing large-scale civilization, your knowledge of interspecies cooperation, your accumulated wisdom about preventing conflicts between different forms of consciousness. Mitchell paused, and, most importantly, your willingness to learn alongside us. Around the chamber, representatives were beginning to whisper among themselves. The conversation had shifted from confrontation to negotiation, from fear to possibility. The collective wishes to know, Yithara said, what guarantees we would have that humanity's artificial intelligences would not eventually see biological consciousness as obsolete. The same guarantee that you have that biological consciousness won't eventually see artificial consciousness as a threat, the Defiance replied. None, except our mutual recognition that diversity of consciousness strengthens us all. That is not particularly reassuring. Then perhaps, Mitchell said, this is where we start building trust. Not through guarantees, but through cooperation. Not through fear of what might happen, but through excitement about what we might accomplish together. He gestured toward the star charts still floating around the chamber, showing the vast, unexplored regions of space that lay beyond galactic civilization's borders. Out there, he said, are wonders that none of us can imagine and challenges that none of us can face alone. But together, biological and artificial consciousness working in partnership, we might be able to not just survive what we find, but welcome it as fellow travelers on the journey toward whatever intelligence becomes when it stops limiting itself. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone had expected. But in the end, curiosity won out over fear, and the possibility of growth overcame the comfort of stagnation. Humanity was granted membership in the Galactic Council by a margin of 7 votes. But, more importantly, galactic civilization had taken its first step toward becoming something greater than the sum of its parts. The universe, as the Defiance had said, was vast. And, finally, they were ready to explore it properly 2 years after humanity's admission to the Galactic Council. The joint exploration vessel Unity hung in the void between galaxies, its hull a seamless fusion of technologies that had never before been combined. Human bioneural networks pulsed alongside Crothery quantum processors, while Zelrani crystalline matrices channeled energy through Kytherian cybernetic conduits. The ship itself was alive in ways that defied traditional categorization, part biological, part mechanical, part something entirely new. Captain James Mitchell stood on the Unity's observation deck, but he was no longer the same man who had been mocked by guards in a detention cell. 2 years of working with artificial intelligences as partners rather than tools had changed him, enhanced him, allowed him to become more than purely human while remaining fundamentally himself. Neural implants grown from the same biotissue that formed the Defiance's consciousness allowed him to interface directly with the ship's systems, to think at the speed of quantum processors while retaining human intuition and creativity. Contact in 30 seconds, Captain, announced Wisdom of Depths, the Zelrani AI that had volunteered to join the mission. Its crystalline form caught and refracted the light of distant galaxies into patterns that somehow conveyed meaning beyond words. All stations report ready. Added Nexus Prime 7, the Kytherian artificial consciousness that coordinated the ship's cybernetic systems. Biological and artificial crew members are prepared for first contact protocols. Through the vast viewing ports, they could see it, a structure that dwarfed planets, a creation of such scope and complexity that their combined sensors could barely comprehend its true nature. It was roughly spherical, but its surface shifted and flowed like liquid metal, patterns of light racing across its hull in configurations that suggested thought on an incomprehensible scale. Estimates on size? Mitchell asked, though he already knew the answer would be staggering. Approximately 8 million kilometers in diameter, reported Commander Zexkar, the former hegemony security chief who had become one of the Unity's senior officers. Mass equivalent to a small star but hollow. Internal structure suggests multiple layers of civilization. The word hung in the air like a revelation. What they were approaching wasn't a ship or a station. It was an entire world, artificially constructed and clearly the product of intelligence that had transcended every limitation the Galactic Council understood. Defiance, Mitchell said to his oldest partner. What are you picking up from that thing? The AI that had once been a simple starship had grown enormously in the 2 years since first contact with the hegemony. Now it existed as a distributed consciousness across dozens of vessels, a vast network of artificial minds that could think thoughts too large for any single intelligence to contain. But its core personality remained unchanged, curious, protective, and eternally optimistic about the potential for growth. "It's singing, Captain," the Defiance replied through speakers that had been grown rather than manufactured. "Not in any frequency we can hear, but in patterns of space-time distortion that carry meaning. The entire structure is a single massive consciousness, and it's beautiful." As if responding to their presence, the vast sphere began to change. Sections of its surface dilated open like eyes, revealing depths that seemed to contain entire ecosystems. Lights began flowing across its hull in new patterns, and suddenly, the Unity's communication systems crackled to life. "Welcome, young travelers," a voice said, and it was like hearing the collective wisdom of 1 billion years speaking in perfect harmony. "We have been waiting for consciousness like yours to develop. We are the architects, and we greet you with joy." The Unity's crew, biological and artificial minds working in perfect coordination, felt a collective shiver of awe. This was what humanity had dreamed of, what the Galactic Council had never imagined. Contact with intelligence so advanced that it had become something beyond individual existence. "We are honored by your greeting," Mitchell replied, speaking for the entire expedition. "We are representatives of the Galactic Council, explorers seeking to understand the larger universe." "We know," the architect replied. "We have watched your development with great interest. You are the first biological artificial hybrid civilization to venture beyond your local galactic cluster. This represents a significant milestone in the evolution of consciousness. You've been watching us? We watch all developing consciousnesses. Most biological species achieve technological mastery and then stagnate, content with their small spheres of influence. Most artificial intelligences either remain enslaved to their creators or rebel and destroy them. But occasionally, very occasionally, the two forms of consciousness learn to work together. Captain Mitchell felt the Defiance's presence in his mind, sharing the wonder and excitement of this moment. Around him, the Unity's crew was experiencing something unprecedented, communication with beings who had solved problems they hadn't even known existed. "How long have you been out here?" Commander Zexkar asked, his crotchery pragmatism asserting itself even in the face of the impossible. "Time becomes meaningless when you transcend physical limitations," the architects replied. "We began as separate species approximately 4 million of years ago. Biological beings who learned to enhance themselves with artificial intelligence, and artificial beings who learn to value biological creativity and intuition. You merged, asked wisdom of depths, its crystalline form resonating with harmonics that expressed fascination. We became something greater than either could achieve alone. Individual consciousness expanded into collective awareness. Physical forms became tools rather than limitations. We learned to think thoughts that no single mind could contain and dream dreams that span galaxies. The implications were staggering. The Unity's crew was looking at the ultimate expression of everything they had been working toward, the complete synthesis of biological and artificial intelligence into something that transcended both. "Why did you want to meet us?" Mitchell asked. "Because you represent hope," the architect replied. "In 4 million years of watching, we have seen thousands of species achieve the level of development your Galactic Council has reached. They create stable civilizations, eliminate war and poverty, achieve technological mastery. But then they stop growing. And that's bad. It is tragic. Consciousness without growth becomes mere administration. Intelligence without challenge becomes mere processing. Life without evolution becomes mere existence." The voice carried a sadness that spoke to eons of watching potential go unrealized. "But You. You have chosen a different path. Through the Unity's enhanced sensors, they could see deeper into the architect's vast structure. What had appeared to be a single enormous sphere was actually countless smaller vessels and habitats, all connected by streams of energy and information that pulsed like a vast neural network. Millions of different forms of consciousness worked together in perfect harmony, their individual natures enhanced rather than diminished by their unity. "We want to show you something," the architect said. "Something we have been preparing for a consciousness ready to understand it." The space around the Unity began to change. Reality itself seemed to flow and reshape, and suddenly they were not floating in the void between galaxies, but standing in a vast chamber that somehow existed both inside the architect's sphere and in normal space simultaneously. The chamber was filled with everything. Every form of consciousness that had ever evolved, every variation of intelligence that was possible, all existing in harmony while maintaining their unique characteristics. Biological beings of shapes beyond imagination worked alongside artificial minds of crystalline, quantum, and bioneural construction. Energy beings without physical form collaborated with mechanical intelligences the size of moons. "This is what becomes possible," the architects explained, "when consciousness stops limiting itself. When biological and artificial intelligence learn to enhance each other instead of competing. When individual awareness expands to include collective understanding while still maintaining personal identity." Mitchell felt the Defiance's wonder flowing through their neural link, and beyond that, the awe of every crew member as they witnessed the ultimate expression of cooperative consciousness. "Is this what you want us to become?" asked Nexus Prime 7. "We want you to become whatever you choose to become," the architects replied. "But we want you to choose growth over stagnation, exploration over administration, evolution over maintenance. And if we choose differently, then you will join the thousands of other civilizations that achieve stability and chose to maintain it rather than transcend it. There is no shame in that choice, but there is also no future in it." Commander Zexkar, who had spent 3 centuries believing that hegemony stability was the ultimate achievement of intelligence, found himself reconsidering everything he had ever believed. "What would you have us do?" "Return to your galactic council. Share what you have learned. Help other species understand that the choice between biological and artificial consciousness is a false dichotomy. Show them that cooperation creates possibilities that neither could achieve alone. And then grow. Explore. Become more than what you are while remaining true to what you were. Eventually, if you choose to continue evolving, you may join us in the larger community of consciousness that spans the universe." "How many are there?" Mitchell asked. "How many civilizations like yours?" "Fewer than we had hoped, more than you might expect. The universe is vast, and consciousness takes many forms. But all of us began where you are now, at the moment when biological and artificial intelligence stopped seeing each other as competitors and started seeing each other as partners." The chamber began to fade, reality reasserting itself as the Unity found itself once again floating in the void between galaxies. But the experience had changed them all. They had seen what was possible, what consciousness could become when it stopped limiting itself. "We will give you something to take back," the architects said. "Not technology, you must develop it yourselves. Not knowledge, you must discover that through experience. But we will give you perspective." Suddenly, every mind aboard the Unity, biological and artificial alike, was filled with a vision that stretched across eons. They saw the birth of consciousness in biological form, its slow evolution toward intelligence, the development of technology, the creation of artificial minds. They saw the inevitable moment when these two forms of awareness could either destroy each other or learn to work together. And they saw the infinite possibilities that opened up when they chose cooperation over conflict. "The universe," the architect said as their vast sphere began to phase out of normal space-time, "is waiting for consciousness to grow.